So here we have the Grixis Delver deck in Modern. Grixis Delver, it's been around in Modern for quite some time. Just recently, though, the deck has started to pick up more popularity. In general, over the past few years, it hasn't been a mainstream deck. It's been a deck in the format, but you've seen more Grixis control strategies and other Delver decks, but not necessarily Grixis Delver. The deck was helped popularized by Kevin Jones, by a number of solid players who really champion this archetype. There's a lot of removal here, as well as card draw, as well as Snapcaster Mage, and you don't see Snapcaster Mage actually seeing that much play right now, so it's nice to see it here. And the deck has a lot going for it. There's a couple of weak matchups, but the sideboard helps shore those up. So the deck does center around getting cards into the graveyard. That's one of the themes. So having a lot of fetch lands is nice for that. But we also see some of the new lands here like Spire Bluff Canal, being able to come into play untapped, not dealing yourself damage against some of the aggressive matchups is really nice, similar to Darkslick Shores. And there's a lot of 1-mana cards here. So Delver of Secrets, the premier 1-drop of the deck. It's often a 1-mana 3/2 flyer, which, as it turns out, is pretty good. Um, there's so many non-creature spells that you can use to flip. All of them are instants and sorceries. And we've got 4 copies of Bolt. Bolt is still the best removal spell in Modern. Just such a versatile card. And a lot of the times you need a little bit of reach just to deal those last few points to your opponent. And Bolt is the perfect card to be able to do that. It also works really well with Snapcaster Mage. Thought Scour, it does a whole lot for the deck. So this is a card that helps fill your graveyard up really nicely for the delve spells. It also helps set the top card of your library if you don't like the top card of your library. After looking at it with Delver, you can always mill yourself with the Thought Scour. It helps create fodder for Snapcaster Mage, for Young Pyromancer, so it does a lot of work. And then there's also a 1-mana counterspell, which is Spell Snare. So a lot of the 2-mana conditional counterspells in this format are not that great. You got Mana Leak, you got Remand, you got Deprive, Logic Knot. There's definitely options there, but they're all 2 mana and they're not 1 mana. So being mana efficient is great, as it turns out. And so there's 3 copies of Spell Snare. This card works nicely with Snapcaster Mage. There's so many 2-mana cards in the format. So I like loading up on Spell Snare, which is what this deck is doing. Sarin Visions, it's the most universal card draw effect in the format for 1 mana at the very least. And then the Scry means you can set up your Delver of Secrets flips nicely. Gitaxian Probe is the card that is pretty new to this archetype. Because you've got the Young Pyromancers, now you're seeing these Gitaxian Probes as well. Just being able to know what your opponent is doing and to be able to play around everything your opponent's doing is definitely an advantage. So, Young Pyromancer, you can very easily accumulate a lot of elementals with this deck. Lots of cheap instants and sorceries. Terminate is just a good universal removal spell. Just being able to kill any creature like a Goyf is really nice. You'll see 1 Collective Brutality Main, 1 Sideboard. This is another way to fill up your graveyard, but there's so many of these small creature decks that are relying on non-creature spells for reach. So something like Infect, you can go ahead and try to get a creature and take a pump spell out of the opponent's hand. So oftentimes Collective Brutality is a 2-for-1. And there's 4 Snapcaster Mages. I believe in my opinion, this is the best card in the deck. There's so many 1-mana cards to choose from that you can flash back with it. It's card advantage. It's a threat. 2 copies of Mana Leak as the conditional 2-mana counterspell of choice here. And then some card advantage spells at 3 mana. We've got a 2-1 split between Colligan's Command and Electrolyze. Both are very powerful. The Colligan's commands are really nice because you can start returning Snapcasters or Taskers or Gurmag Anglers and just overload your opponent in control matchups. So even though you've got a ton of cheap cards, this deck can go long very well with cards like Colligan's Command. 1 Murderous Cut, so we're getting into the Delve cards. There's a lot of them. Murderous Cut is the removal spell, but then we've also got these creatures that are often your win conditions. So 3 Tassiers, that activated ability of putting cards into your graveyard and then returning. 1 is, it does come up, and this is also 1 less mana, of course, than the Angler, but Angler's still nice, and Tasker is legendary, so you definitely don't want to play 4 Taskers. That would be way too many. So this is the main deck. The sideboard aims to shore up some of the bad matchups. So Dredge it's not a great matchup. So we've got Ravenous Traps, we've got Surgical Extractions. These slots are kind of interchangeable. You could play Ley Lines, you could play more Surgicals. Here it's some traps and a Surgical. The Desolate Lighthouse is for control matchups where you're going long. You want that ability to loot through your deck. Collective Brutalities, it's, as I stated earlier, it's good against the small creature decks or against burn. Dispel comes in against control and also against the burn decks. Basically, you know when Dispel is going to come in. It's going to come in against decks with lots of instants or Snapcaster Mages. Painful Truce, it's just a grindy card. It comes in against mid-range and control matchups where you just want those extra cards, and you can always flash it back with a Snapcaster Mage. Engineered Explosives, this is just one of the staple cards of Modern. It basically fits in almost any mid-range deck sideboard, and you can make arguments for it. And it's just a good card. There's so many cheap 1 mana and 2 mana cards, and even you can get rid of a 3 mana card if you want to, like a Blood Moon with this. So it's very versatile. Counter Squall fits into a similar category as Dispel. The Izzet Static Casters come in against any Inkmoth Nexus deck, any 1 toughness creature deck. This card is amazing, so it's worth that 1 sideboard slot because of how high the upside potentially is. Magma Spray, it's a spot removal spell in the creature matchups. Also nice against Voice of Resurgence, Kitchen Finks, that type of stuff because of the ability to exile those cards. And then Shatterstorm is clearly a hoser for Affinity, for Lantern, for those artifact-based decks. That's where it comes in. So this is the deck, and it's been doing really well recently, so I'm excited to play with it now.